Here we go. All right. Good morning. If you're on the West Coast, Northern Hemisphere, good evening. If you're down in the Southern Hemisphere, I hope you all are having an amazing week so far. Hey, Janice. So check it out. Welcome to Wake the Fuck Up Wednesday. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I think was a big learning point for me as a perfectionist, okay? Oh, hey, Sarah. Hey, Mel. So I wanted to talk about how to fail. I know it's not as sexy as like how to have multiple orgasms or something like that. But I tell you what, before you learn to have multiple orgasms, you got to usually fail at a few things to figure it out. So this can kind of relate. All right. So welcome to Wake the Fuck Up Wednesday, where we are talking about how to fail perfectly. And I'm super stoked because this week I graduated from Johns Hopkins from my postdoctoral program in psychiatric mental health nursing. And now I'm in my fellowship for the psychedelic assisted therapy. I'm just loving my learning life right now. And this weekend, we're going to celebrate with some friends over on Kenai Lake. It's going to be awesome. And then I'm going back to Hawaii next week. So I'll be saying aloha next week from there. So excited. But anyway, so why am I talking about failure today? Well, I coached a client this week that was like in tears because of failing an exam that they had in a graduate program that they're in. And she gave me permission to share this because she found it so powerful to kind of turn this around. Okay. So basically, the day of our coaching call, she had received the results of an exam she took. And she's like, I failed so badly. And then she was in this kind of downward spiral of like, does this mean that I shouldn't even be doing this? Am I cut out for this? And was just like visibly shaking and sobbing and crying. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, let's back up for a second here. You are making this failure about who you are, your worthiness, right? And all this is a result that you created. And she was like, what? No, I got an F, like failure. F stands for failure. And I was like, I understand. This is how we're taught in life, right? So here we are as adults, but when we were younger, we were taught that a failure is things are done. It's over. Too bad. Be ashamed of it and hide it. But if you get an A, then yeah, you can celebrate that. You succeed. So think about that. For like years and years, we're taught this in school, right? But then here we are as adults processing that same teaching into the context of our lives, not just with grades anymore, right? And so, well, first of all, this is also why I had gone to UC Santa Cruz. There was like no grades, not because you want to be a slacker or not get grades, but you want it to be about the learning and not about if I fail or not, right? And so props to UC Santa Cruz for doing that. But anyway, so think about it. We're trained to believe this, right? We're trained to believe that it's only okay if we don't fail. But when we look at what does create success, what does get us towards our goals, actually, it's all of the times that we fail and that we learn from it that move us towards our goals, right? That is how we get there. Not by being born knowing something. We learn, and we think of it like, think about it in terms of grit, right? Being willing to stick with something, even though it's really uncomfortable too. Like as babies, we did this supernaturally, right? We as babies basically were born to fail. And that is how we learn. We're like trying to eat, or here, I just have my mug, my big ass Alaska mug. We're trying to eat. We're like, oh, whoop, it's not going in my face. Oh, there you go. Mouth, right? Takes us a while. We get really messy in the meantime. But what if we just stopped? Because we're like, fuck it. Try to get that shit into my mouth too many times and it's not working. I'm not cut out for the eating thing. Or walking. We know that the process of falling actually builds the muscles that we need to be able to walk, to cruise around the farmer's market, to like hike and do all these amazing things. Yeah. And yet, as adults, we're like, wait, I have to fail to get that? If it doesn't come easily, it feels like it wasn't meant to be. Many people want the life, the dream, right? They want the abundance, but they're not willing to do whatever it takes, despite failures. Right. I mean, and I'm telling you this not from a place of judgment. I've been there. Like, school's easy for me. So I could do like 80% effort and still get A's. And I liked that because I never had to apply myself 100%. And I'll tell you, I was terrified to apply myself 100% because if it didn't work out, that meant that I had no, like that was my 100%. That's what I thought it meant. It meant that I wasn't cut out for that if I gave it my all and it still failed. So I only applied to schools I knew I'd get into. I would only climb stuff that like I knew I wouldn't fall, lead climbing. So I'd stick to like moderate alpine routes. I would only paddle rivers that I didn't flip. Right. But I wasn't getting better. I kind of plateaued. I plateaued intellectually. I plateaued athletically. Right. And so it's when we agree to fail, when we take on the failure as part of the learning process, that we actually get better and get closer towards our goals. And it's way more fulfilling, right, y'all? Like, what if someone just handed you your goals and dreams? Here you go. Do you really think you'd be like, sweet? I mean, for a minute, you'd be like, this is awesome. But the brain would then create another goal because we are driven as humans to push ourselves, to achieve things. So many times I see people suffering because they don't feel challenged enough in life. They don't feel like they are living their potential. And you're never going to know it's possible if you don't try, and if you don't try enough to fail. Yeah. And that's the clincher. It's like, that's how we find out. Now, if you find yourself in a place of deciding, like a lot of people will come to coaching because they can't decide on something. Like, oh, I just really want to help deciding this. Look, I can like give advice and someone can follow it. And they're like, yay, thank you. That totally helped. It changed everything. Okay, well, that's good. And, I do that when it's appropriate. But the ideal thing is for you to figure it out yourself. That's when it's integrated. That's when you have faith that that is within you to do. The only reason I'm confident saying stuff and giving advice and the things I do give is because I've lived it myself. I would feel really awkward giving advice that I didn't know in my bones and experience myself. Yeah. And the ultimate goal is that you find that wisdom within you as well. So let me see if there are any questions here. Okay. And yet, good. Ask me questions if you have any, y'all. Okay. So failing, right? We avoid failing like the plague. We avoid the discomfort of failing. We avoid making a decision. Why? Not because we're confused. It's because being confused is more comfortable than the risk of failing. And being confused feels better, even though we say, I don't like being confused, it feels better than what could potentially happen, which is feeling failure, right? That's why we don't make a decision. We sit there and we say, hey, I wonder if I should move there. I can't decide. So I'm stuck here. And it's like, no, you can actually just make a decision and figure it out instead of deciding. But then what we worry about is, oh, I want to know it's the right thing ahead of time. And that makes sense because the way we were taught when we were growing up is that, oh, from the smart people taught us things that because they already know the answers to our question. And that's how we make progress. We listen to the smart people that tell us things, we memorize it, we regurgitate it. That's kind of how school works in most places, right? So it makes sense that we think the answer's out there from some expert outside of us. But it's within us. And how do you think those experts figured that shit out anyway? Did you know, like, to get a doctorate degree, you have to contribute new knowledge to the field? So these people, the experts, right? The only reason they know stuff is because they thought of something new that no one had ever done before, that no one knew the answer to, and went out and sought the answer themselves. And hands down, there's a ton of failures. You know, when I did my doctoral project in Nepal, we had so many roadblocks, literal like landslide roadblocks, because I was doing a project in like rural clinics in Nepal and doing emergency transports to a tertiary care facility in Kathmandu. And it was like, we had so many blocks. We had communication blocks, people not turning in surveys, not being able to get out to do trainings, all kinds of things. Learned a lot, wrote a fucking paper on it, right? It's like, that is part of the process, is the failing and the learning. Here's what I want you to grok. Failure is not a thing, even if the F is there, literally, right? You don't get the job. You don't get accepted into the program. You get a divorce. You don't make enough money in your business to sustain it the first year, whatever it is. Some people come to me and they're like, kind of an obvious failure. I remember once when I was posting about how like getting divorced from my first husband was like one of like the hardest decisions I ever made, but that, I was so proud of myself for doing it because it didn't come from a place of fear. And someone was like, how can you be ashamed of how can you not be ashamed of such a failure? And I was like, well, that's one way to look at it, not the way I'm looking at it, right? And so we can choose how we perceive failures. Hey, Erica, what's up? So think about it. We have all this proof of failure. We think it's factual, that the divorce is failure, that not having the job is failure, whatever it is, right? Actually, that's just a fact, right? Just like a little fact, little thing sitting in front of you. It's a result that you created from actions or inactions, right? So instead of like, if you have a business and you're like, oh, I'm not making as much money as I'd like, instead of looking at it like, I'm not really cut out for business, right? I failed. You can look at it like, what did I do or not do? And how could I do it differently? Because all the failure is a result that has come from a type of action you took or did not take. Not about who you are, not about your worthiness, your lovability, or any of that. What we end up doing, though, is something hard happens. It didn't go the way we wanted. It wasn't as easy as we thought it would be. And we decide it has something to do with our worthiness, our lovability, and all that. And we judge it. And then we label it a failure. So we have a thought, I failed. We have a thought, I wasn't a failure, or like I am a failure, or that was a failure. If we didn't have that thought, it would just be a result that we created, right? Yeah. It wouldn't have the loaded nature of it. It wouldn't have the judgment there, okay? So we need to recognize that whatever is happening out there is neutral. And we get to decide what we want to make of it. We get to decide if we're going to call it a failure. We get to decide if we're going to learn from it or not. We could say, of course, this is part of the process. So like, how do we decide what to think about it? Well, I'll tell you one thing, thinking that it's a failure or that you're a failure tends to not move you towards your goals. That keeps you stuck, right? What keeps you moving towards your goals is learning, buying into failure as part of the deal, learning from it. You know, a few episodes ago, I did massive action, right? Doing whatever it takes to create the goal that you want. And that is not easy, my friends, because doing whatever it takes means you're probably going to have to deal with a lot of failures along the way. But if you're like, it's all good, I just have to keep going and keep trying, right? And then I will get there because I'm not going to stop no matter what arises. And this can go for spiritual goals too, right? Oh, like I'm not making any progress in my meditation. Well, I must be broken. Something's wrong with me. I need to meditate more. I need to meditate harder. I need to meditate better, right? No. We can look at it. What am I learning here? Same thing with any goal. So what can we do to help us build resilience to failure? The best thing we can do is to change our perception of failure. Because again, that's a loaded word, right? All that happened is some facts, some neutral facts, right? That's all that happened. So, you know, you've heard me say before, and I can't figure out who said this first. I first heard it from Brooke Castillo, but it's been said before her, but discomfort is the currency of your dreams. And part of that is failure. Failure is the currency. You know, we often want to buy our result. We often want to buy the success ahead of time with either time, money, or energy. We're like, all right, I'll throw some time at it, throw some money, throw some energy, but we're not willing to throw the failure experience, however much it takes to get what we want. And when we do that, that is the bomb diggity, right? That is the bomb date. Oh, I'm going to close the door because my husband is talking here. Okay. All right. I didn't know if it was like in the background. Sometimes you guys can hear it or not. Anyway, so we were all born with this resilience to fail as kids. Failing, learning to eat, failing, walking. That's how we got better at it. That's how we got good. We didn't judge ourselves as a kid and be like, oh, I'm a piece of shit. I don't know how to walk. Right? We're like, this is how I learned to walk. And when like a kid is trying to walk and they're falling, you're not like fucking concerned about that. Did you see that kid? He didn't know how to walk. We're like, of course they're falling. We go, yay, get back up, try it again. That's what we need to do for ourselves, right? We need to say, okay, this is just a result. What did I do or not do? And how can I learn from that? And what thought do I want to have about this instead? Instead of this was a failure or I failed. Hey, Jackie. Instead of having all of these different thoughts about it, right? That aren't moving us forward, that are keeping us stuck. You know, the other thing we do is we blame, we shame, we make up excuses. I mean, go ahead, but it's not going to keep you moving forward. Like sometimes I'll say to a client that's really coming up with a bunch of excuses, I'm like, well, you could either be right or you can make progress. So like, think about it. Like, would you rather be right or would you rather get unstuck and make progress, right? So we get to choose the thoughts that we want to about the result that happened, because that's all that failure is, right? The thought is an option. And when we build ZG, that radiant inner confidence, the ability to be with discomfort more, that is when the sky's the limit. Because the number one reason that I see people holding back on their dreams, on doing whatever it takes to make something happen, is a fear of failure. So this is why in coaching, we ask, like one of the most powerful questions a coach could ask, and it's common, not because it's cliche, but because it's powerful. What would you do if you knew you could not fail? And that's where it arises, right? Like, we're like, wow, I would do all of these things if I wasn't afraid of failing. And we're not actually afraid of the result that would get created. We're afraid of how we'd feel. So we want to not feel bad about ourselves. But the only reason we would feel bad about ourselves is because of the thoughts we would have about it, right? Right. So we can choose. I am going to take this on as part of the journey. We're going to buy in, not just to the amazing result that comes at the end, but to the whole journey. I mean, this is part of every hero and heroine's journey, right? It's the failure. Even Luke Skywalker, right? It's part of the deal. So yeah, it's really powerful to ask, what would you do if you knew you would not fail? But an even more powerful question that I like to ask, what would you do even if you knew you would fail? That is so powerful as an insight into what it is you really want to do. Because when you're willing to do something, even if you're going to have these failures, that is soul driven, right? So think about and ask yourself, what are you willing to do if you weren't going to fail, or even if you knew you would? Because what's possible when you're willing to fail? Anything. Okay, rebels? So I want you to go out there and I want you to find out what's possible for you. Ask yourself these questions, okay? All right. Have an amazing week. Next week, I'm going to be in Hawaii. It's going to be awesome. I will see you then. And hey, if you're interested in doing this next level shit, go to adventuremastermind.com. 6 months, small intimate group, 2 retreats in Hawaii on the Big Island, super COVID safe. I have all the answers about that if you have questions about it. Taking all the proper precautions, keeping the group small, being outside a ton in the sun. It's going to be great. So come join adventuremastermind.com. Okay, my loves. All right. Mwah. Bye.